This is Dale Fye, and I'm the presenter, or not the presenter, I am the host of the Access Users Group Eastern Time. And today we're going to have a discussion about VBA Code Quality, hosted by Philip Stiefel from Germany. Philip, please take it away.
Thank you very much, Dale. So, yeah, I'm very happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me. And I'm talking about VBA Code Quality. And just for organizational stuff, I will be around after the presentation to answer questions. So I think it works best if we do that in the end. And well, yeah, I think that's it, and we can get started. All right, VBA Code Quality. Let's get into this topic with results from last year's or the most recent Stack Overflow survey. They mentioned VBA in first spot for the most dreaded programming language. And of course, Microsoft is kind of ignoring VBA. They didn't do anything about enhancing VBA or enhancing the VBA development environment in the last 15 to 20 years. So that certainly is a huge factor in that. But I think another factor that VBA made it to the top spot on the most dreaded language list is that there is lots and lots of VBA code out there that is of poor quality. And part of that is probably due to VBA being a language for non-programmers, for novices, beginners, and people who are not really programmers by trade, but want to create a very fixed solution or are just using the macro recorder in Word or Excel. And that is a huge factor. But also, I think we professional developers kind of value our rapid part of the VBA development process a little bit too much. And we are so proud that we are developing stuff fast that we don't care and think enough about long-term implications of going so fast and doing quick and dirty solutions. So that is something that I'm going to address today, how to improve the software quality and the VBA code quality. And software quality isn't actually a term I just made up or invented. It is something that is used by the International Standard Organization. They have a whole standard about software quality. And one of the main sections in that standard is about maintainability. I'm not going into too much detail, just that you see this is not something for a niche or something that is my personal idea or relevant to a small group, but it is an international standard there about that. So let's talk about high code quality and what immediate effects that has on the code. Code is easy to understand. It is easy to test and easier to change. And resulting from these 3 bullets is that your code has fewer errors. And that in itself is, of course, a good thing, but let's look at the indirect effects of high code quality. And that is, you will need less development time, at least long term. Of course, when initially writing something, you will probably spend more time writing higher quality code and making your application more maintainable. But writing code is actually is taking only a fraction of the time you interact with code. Most of the time you read code to understand it and to get an idea how you can enhance it. So long-term, high code quality will result in less development time. And that is less cost for the client, which is nice but does not benefit us. But if the client pays less money, in general, you can charge more money for your time. So it positively affects you as a developer as well. So, good reasons to think about this topic. And before you ask, maybe you think, yeah, okay, these topics are only relevant for a team of multiple developers to get them all on the same page, to better work together. And no, that is not the case, because think about it. Code you have written some time ago, like a couple of months ago, and you look at it now, you will not know what was the reason why you wrote it that way and what you had in your mind. It could also be written by somebody else. And another reason is if you introduce quality standards for your code and you really define them in written form, then you will help you hold yourself accountable to adhere to these standards. So this is very relevant also for a single developer. Okay, the first topic that comes to mind when thinking about code quality in itself is coding conventions. I guess you all use option explicit in every module. I guess you use type variables and code indentation, so I'm not really going to talk about that today. But what about naming conventions or clean code or commenting code? That are topics I'm going to dig in today a little bit. Naming conventions. The very first thing that comes to mind when talking about naming conventions is the Hungarian notation. That was invented by Charles Simoni, an Hungarian, and hence the name Hungarian notation. And we in the VBA sphere, we probably know it best by the Lesinski-Redick naming conventions. That is something that really comes up if a discussion gets started about coding standards and naming conventions for VBA. Basically, Lesinski-Redick is probably among the top 3 mentioned things, but let's look at the Hungarian notation and Lesinski-Redick a little bit closer. It all started with apps Hungarian notation. And if you're familiar with the Windows API, you will kind of recognize these prefixes you see there in the simple assignment. HWND is the prefix for a window handle, and CB is the prefix for a count of byte. And in the Windows API, there are lots of these prefixes to kind of define the semantic role of variables. If you look at the declaration in VBA, you will notice both variables are of type long. So that does not really match our idea of Hungarian notation, but it's pretty important to keep that in mind. It's semantic variable type. Now, a little bit later, there came another variant of the Hungarian notation around, the systems Hungarian. And this is much more familiar to what we see. We see the LNG prefix for our long variable type. And now, if you look at the assignment statement, yeah, along something else assigned to LNG something, that makes pretty much sense, but well, it doesn't really help that much. Now let's add something else into the equation, meaningful names. And now I deliberately, I replaced the something and something else variable names with main window handle and buffer size. And now if you look at the assignment, you see at first glance, there is probably something wrong there. A main window handle is equal the buffer size. That does not really make sense, or the buffer size is assigned to the main window handle. There's nothing good that will come from that. So the meaningful name was something that was very, very important for understanding the code and spotting the error that I introduced here. And now let's take away the Hungarian notation, and you will still see that there is something fishy going on. So back to our naming convention stuff, I think Hungarian notation doesn't help too much. If you want to use it, go ahead and use it. I'm not advocating against it, but it is not that helpful. There are other aspects that are, in my opinion, much more relevant, like the human language. If you're all in the United States, that is probably not really a topic for you because you all speak English and will use English when writing code. But over here in Europe, you might think, yeah, should we only use English in our code? Should we use German? Should we anticipate another developer and he will prefer one of those languages? So the human language that you use has much more effect probably. And you should agree on standard terminology for the business domain stuff. Like if you have one developer who is always talking about clients and he's writing like client ID as a variable in his code, and another developer, he sees the clients as customers and he's writing customer ID, and that is confusing. And if one of the developers reads the other developer's code, he will not understand that. And if someone new joins the team, you will not understand that the client and the customer is both one and the same. So you should think about those things and agree on a standard terminology for your project. You should agree on standard spelling, like do you use camel case, uppercase for constants? Do you use underscores as word separator or just a other case character on that location? Or how do you write that stuff? Do you use any prefixes like in the Hungarian apps notation? Whatever, but how do you name things? That is pretty much relevant. And be careful with acronyms and abbreviations. There might be stuff that you find perfectly logical because you work on a project for many months, and someone new will not understand at all what you're talking about if you are using cryptic abbreviations. So in the end, it boils down to using meaningful and pronounceable names. That is really, really important, I think. And once we kind of have the meaningful names, we should use them to name things. An operation becomes a method, and you can name the method. A result can be stored in a variable, and you can name the variable to name that particular value. If you're using constants in your code, you should use, or if you use constant literals like numbers, you should define constants and giving them names that they are easily understandable. And if you got a list of multiple options, you can name them with an enum. And let's look at some code. That is unnamed code. The logic is perfectly clear here. But what about what about blocks like this one or this up here, or like these small magic numbers here? If you look at that and I'm not really familiar with the code, you don't know what does this mean. So we can use names to make the code much clearer, and this is exactly the same logic as on the previous slide, but with expressive names. You can almost read that as prose. If not order is invoiced, then message box okay only, cannot ship, not invoiced. Else if order is shipped, then message box okay only, cannot ship, order shipped already. That is intuitively understandable, and just by adding the names in there where cryptic expressions or cryptic literal constants were written right into the code. So you instantly understand what's going on in this code just by using names in there. The logic has not changed at all. And that is really good to get to the next subtopic, clean code. So what is clean code? And I like to cite Grady Booch, and he said, clean code is simple and direct. Clean code reads like well-written prose. Clean code never obscures the designer's intent, but rather is full of crisp abstractions and straightforward lines of control. I really like this poetic explanation, and it's very, very good as well, I think. But let's look at the basics of clean code. We earlier established, yeah, we should have a coding standard. And the first rule of clean code is, yeah, follow the standard. Pretty easy. Next one, the simpler is always better. Yes, of course, why make something more complicated than it needs to be? And finally, the Boy Scout rule, leave the code cleaner than you found it. So you should address readability problems or other problems in code in the same way you would really address a technical bug to make the code better and cleaner. There are some general rules. Don't repeat yourself. I think that rings with everybody. We should avoid redundancy when programming. But also another thing, limit dependencies and coupling. And that is something we have a lot in Access, and we tend to do a lot. Just imagine the forms bang, form name bang, subform name dot form bang, control name dot value, that very long chain of dependencies, literally. If you rename any object in that long chain, you will break your code. It does depend on a form that can be anywhere in your application. And if you have such lines of code in your methods, then you have lots and lots of dependencies. So it would be much better to depend on concrete values. Instead of referencing control somewhere else, you should just pass in the value if you need the value. And you don't need to worry about on which form is that control. Or if you need the actual control to enable or disable it, just pass in that control, not the whole reference to its form and all the stuff that is not really relevant here. So it's depend on abstractions and not concretizations. Try to keep it as general as possible. Pass in the text box, pass in the control, not that specific control with a very long reference, as I just said. Now, when looking at methods, our functions and procedures, there are a couple of suggestions in clean code as well. They should be small. Well, that is relative, but I think a good rule of thumb is if your method does not fit on a screen and you need to scroll to see all of it, it is most likely too long. So you should break it up and put other things in smaller subroutines and make the method you're looking at smaller in size. And that usually goes hand in hand with a method should do one thing only. It should be quite clear what a method does, and it should only do this single thing. And it should not have side effects affecting other parts of the application that are not immediately related to what the function is supposed to have as few arguments as possible. And especially it should not have flag arguments to control its behavior. And the last item is something I struggled to understand. And when I prepared this presentation originally, I kind of wrote a method to kind of make that clearer what it means. And that is this simple function. It's called calculate. Well, the name is okay, it calculates, but what does it calculate? That is defined by the last argument, the calc type. And if you look closer at the method, you see, yeah, there's a calculation type: addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. So it's basic math, and it can do all of it. And that is, well, let's just focus on the flag variable type. That behavior is defined by the calc type flag. Okay, and now let's remove the calc type flag and do it better with clean code rules. And then we'll end up with this. Now we've got 4 methods: add, subtract, multiply, and divide. And that basically shows all virtues of, or all suggestions of clean code. The methods are much shorter now. They only do one thing. The flag argument is gone because we don't need it anymore. And there is not any more dependencies in there. So it is much more expressive, and the names are much more clearer. You instantly know what the method does now. So that is clean code, or the basic clean code rules applied to methods. And it all kind of comes together with what we previously thought about, of clear names and stuff like that. That all goes one step further here if you adhere to those rules. Now, there are also clean code rules for classes, and I'll only mention some of them. Classes should be small as well, but obviously with a class it's much harder to judge if it is too big or small enough. But once again, the do one thing only, or for a class rather be one thing only rule applies here. And if a class has too many things it tries to be, then it should be broken up and will automatically become smaller. And classes should hide their internal logic, so you will not see their private methods, private member variables and stuff. All that should be hidden away. That are clean code rules for classes that we can use in VBA. There are lots and lots other suggestions, but they are not as relevant for VBA because we have got limited inheritance and lots of limitations in our object orientation features in VBA. So I just skip over them. Another pet peeve of mine, comments. Look at that for a second. That is from a manual of some sort of speakerphone thingy. And I think that is as good as comments can be. And they're pretty useless if you ask me. But let's dig a little bit deeper here. I kind of compiled a couple of samples. These are real world samples. They are not doctored in any way. They're taken from live applications that I inherited from other people or were written by other people on my team, and they are real. Like this one, a section private methods, and all the methods in there are public. That comment is wrong and useless. Oh, I hate this one. This makes me totally crazy if I see something like this. We've got the comment SP is the procedure name, and I don't get it. If you write the code and say, yeah, okay, I've got an argument SP, and that is, people will not understand what it is. So I write a comment and say, yeah, that's the stored procedure name. Why? Why? I totally get upset when I see that. Why don't you just use stored procedure name for your variable name. Then you would see it everywhere in IntelliSense when you call that method. Not only if you look right at it and see the comment. That is totally bad behavior, and I see it over and over and over again, and it totally drives me crazy here. The procedure header, that is something that I frequently see and say, yeah, okay, we try to make our code super maintainable. Every procedure has a header. And it explains what is the procedure name, who wrote it, when was it written, and what is its purpose. And this is as well taken from a real-world application. I blurred out the actual author to protect the guilty here. And this comment about the purpose is at least incomplete, and it's partially wrong. And that the procedure does not match that comment anymore. And the date is wrong as well, because I'm pretty sure it was modified afterwards. That is pretty much useless and misleading. It's not just useless, but it will kind of get you on the wrong track. So when we think about commenting code, module and procedure headers, no, I don't think so. They frequently get out of date, and most of the information in there is completely irrelevant. I'll get to that, back to that later in a minute. Explaining code that is hard to read and hard to understand. No, I don't like that either. Make the code easy to read and understand. Explaining code that's hard to read is like there's a pothole in the street and you put a sign next to it and say, be careful, there's a pothole, instead of just fixing the hole. So if your code is hard to read, then improve it and make it easier to read. Good reasons to write comments is explanation of intent. Sometimes it's not clear why you're doing stuff, and you cannot really write that, express that in code, and then you can use a comment to make that clear. Or sometimes there might be situations where you absolutely have no idea how you can make the code clear and understandable. Then you can add a comment to clarify code, but that's a means of last resort. And I think it can be boiled down to why, not what. Comment why you do something. If you feel the need to explain what you're doing, then you should improve your code that it becomes more obvious right away. And I had a hard time finding an example for a good comment in that regard. I found one, and you don't need to look too closely. That is something that appears not to make too much sense on first glance. It's just we link an Excel sheet into an Access database, or we open a connection to an Excel sheet and we say, yeah, this has no headers. We want to include the first line. And on the next line of code, we say, okay, we select from that range we just opened everything except the first line with the headers. That seems to be pretty much ridiculous at first glance, and someone would try to optimize the code and says, yeah, okay, we just change the header flag to yes and can get rid of the second line completely. No. We deliberately did it that way so that the headers are used for the data type detection, because that is something that often the ACE engine often gets wrong when reading Excel data. It just kind of analyzes the first 30 rows or so and then derives the data type from that, and that can be wrong. So this is deliberately written a little bit dodgy, apparently dodgy, to work around that problem. And that is what the comment explains. And that is a comment that is basically essential, because I wouldn't know how to express that in code directly. Next bigger topic is static code analysis. What is that? It's analyzing code without executing it. And if you don't know yet what I mean, it's very, very simple. The first and the most common static code analysis is done by the VBA compiler. So if you compile the code, you're already doing static code analysis, because the compiler will tell you, oh no, I don't know this variable, and you're not allowed to do this here, and stuff. It will kind of validate the syntax. The next step there is you can define coding rules and validate the compliance to these rules. I get back to that in a minute. And another option for static code analysis are code reviews. You ask someone else on your team or someone on a public forum or stuff, and you post your code and say, yeah, can you check if that code makes sense, if it's good code, if it's bad code, is there a bug in there? That's basically code review. I guess you all know that. So back to the coding rules. There are a couple of coding rules I like to enforce, and I think they're basically, you can apply them in every VBA application and can completely adopt them. You should have complete declarations, like each variable should have a type, and methods should have a type, and arguments should have types, and methods should have return, functions should have return values and stuff like that. Nowhere in your application code, at least not when you are delivering it, should be a stop or an end statement. That must not exist anywhere in your code. And I absolutely dislike stuff as do menu items, send keys, run command, and the ancient DDE stuff. I haven't seen that in a while. Well, so I don't want these in my code. Maybe run command. There are very, very few run commands that you actually need, but usually for almost all of them, there's a better alternative. So there are a couple of tools that will do static code analysis. One is RubberDuck VBA. It has code inspections. That is a predefined rule set, and RubberDuck will check the code and point out violations against its rules. I'm not going to show RubberDuck VBA because I always have trouble working with it in large projects. It tends to hang, to be very slow, and stop responding at all. So I really love the ideas in RubberDuck VBA, but it's not really ready to be used in larger Access projects. At least it wasn't a couple of months ago when I last looked. Another one is MZ Tools, Review Quality, and the Total Access Analyzer of FMS. So let's look at MZ Tools. Oh, and I need to check that in. Oh, excuse me for a second. That was just a hot fix. So excuse me. I totally forgot about that. Okay, let's do a quick review quality demo here in the MZ Tools menu in VBA. Is review quality, and it brings up this dialog, and I can just run it. And now let's zoom in a little bit. It will analyze the application and point out problems with code quality. And I will collapse this for a moment, and now we can expand it. It has the same structure as the VBA project, you know. In modules, we can select single modules, and once you expand that, you will see the blue part. That is a problem that was detected. And here is the why I think that is a problem. Modules must contain option explicit. That is something we should agree on. Now, here it is complaining about line indenting. Maybe I can, oops, excuse me. Try to put that side by side with the function. So yeah, line indenting is a problem here. Every method must have an access modifier. Yeah, that's just function that private or public is missing. And now it's complaining about variables here. I should use by vol or by reference, and that variable is just a. And that is a problem in itself. We'll see that in a second. Here are other things it points out. The variable c is not used. C nowhere used. I could delete that. And variables, I can't see that here. Pop that out. Variables cannot be a single letter and stuff like that. All that is verified. That is static code analysis. And MZTools is telling me what I did wrong in writing that code. And let's look at the options that are there, because these are not built-in rules. There are a couple of predefined rules that come with it, but you can define your own rules. These are all the sections of static code analysis, and the four checked ones that are the most important: that code review, line indenting, nomenclature, and programming rules. And let's go to the options for the programming rules. And let's pick one, maybe the method. These are the individual rules I defined, and that is a rule: a function needs a return value. Everybody should agree to that pretty much. And now I can open a details screen, and then I select a property, which property of the method I want to evaluate. And MZTools provides lots of different properties, like the line count, the blank line count, comment count, the whole code, the procedure name, the procedure type, or rather method kind, as it's called. Then you can compare that with different values, matching the expression, and this is a regular expression here. So you see, I'm looking in the code, is there the function name, and there is a value assigned to it. Basically, do I assign a return value to the function? That is the rule, and that is validated with a regular expression here. And I can define lots and lots of other rules in here. But we are slightly in a hurry maybe, so I'm not going much deeper, but MZTools is a really powerful tool and has lots of options to do static code analysis. So that's for that. Yeah, demo MZTools, that was I just did. And I see already the question about source control. Yeah, source control is a tool to improve code quality. Doesn't seem to make sense at first, but let's look at a couple of facts. Source code control helps us to separate the code from its metadata. And the history that you get in source code control, that will tell you who did it, why did he do it, at least if he added a comment to his check-in, and what was actually changed in a certain check-in to compare to the previous version. And that is basically why I say the procedure headers, they are not very valuable, because that is something that you can easily derive from the source code control history. If you use it, then you will have all that information, and other than the the header in comments that is only helpful and correct if you always maintain it, the source code control history will be, except for the explanation, will be automatically correct because the username and the date of the check-in will always be automatically logged. These will always be correct. And if you enforce check-in comments, you at least remind the developer that he or she should write an explanation for this particular change. And so with a repository in source control, you end up with the single source of truth. That is the state of your application. If you work on multiple computers or with multiple developers, your source code repository, that is what needs to measure up. And I always tell developers working with me in a team who say, yeah, I checked in something yesterday that was pretty rubbish and I have a much better version with all bugs fixed on my machine. And I say, yeah, as far as I'm concerned, that does not exist unless it's checked into the source code control repository, and then only I will consider your bug fixes as existing and will verify them. And another important part in our particular context today, a source code control repository can be the basis for an automatic code quality check. And that is something MZ tools can do as well. So I hope it worked. We'll see that in a second. I kind of messed up in my presentation because I checked in much too late, but I'd show you an email I created previously. And this is an email I just got sent, and it's basically containing the same stuff as the MZ code quality review I showed you earlier. It's just in an email, and whenever I check in something into our repositories, in our source code control repositories, there will be an automatic process grabbing these most recent changes and running the MZ tools code quality checks on that. And if there is anything that my rules where my rules have been violated, it will generate an email and send this email to the developer who checked in the code. And that is something I really, really love, because I work with other developers frequently, and it was always my part to nag them and say, yeah, that you can't use just a single letter variable, or you should use option explicit, and you forgot that there. And I needed to manually remind them, and I hate doing that. And so this is an automatic process that will do the same and will generate an email and say, yeah, look at your code, you did some things we agreed upon to not do usually. So we're nearly done here. About that. Something messed up with the presentation. So I encourage you as professionals, please care about the quality of your code. So for now, thank you for listening, but I will be still here and answer questions and stuff. Just give me a second to go through them. Yeah, thank you, Dale. Yeah, thank you, George. Few things, yeah, you don't agree with. Jim, we can definitely discuss them. I'm not an advocate of hard rules. That is not the only way to do it. All the stuff I showed you today, please think about it. And if you don't want to use it, then don't use it. I'm not really like a fanatic in that regard, but think about them. That is all I'm asking you. And what application are you using for code check-ins? That is actually Iversy. That is a product I created that I sell commercially. And that is, yeah, well, it's a source code control plugin for Microsoft Access. It's basically doing the same thing as the Microsoft source code plugin did, which was discontinued with Access 2013. But Iversy, my solution, still works and basically was created because Microsoft discontinued support for that. So you can use that, and it's almost completely compatible to the Microsoft solution and works in every version from Access 2007 to 2019. So, if you've got further questions, then you're very welcome. And yeah, I'm still here and listening.
Can you hear me, Philip? 1, 2, 3, hold on.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, great. Sometimes it's hard for me to tell on my headphones. Thanks, Philip. I really appreciate it. I saw part of this discussion from your video that you saved at the Access DevCon, and really enjoyed it. I'm like Jim. I mean, there's some things that I do differently, and but for the most part, I tend to like a lot of your comments. I'm guilty of long code modules, that, where I should just call a bunch of different functions or procedures to do elements of that. I think that is much more readable, and that's one of the things I strongly agreed with in your presentation is that. Anybody have any questions or have any comments? I think everybody's mics are.
Okay. Hi, this is Pat. Did you say you created your source module yourself, your source control, Philip?
Yes. And it's not, I should make that clear, it's not a source code control solution on its own. It's just a plugin to, I can, if you don't know it, I can show it in Access. It's just a plugin into Microsoft Access, and it will connect to an existing source code control solution that, like Team Foundation Server or Visual Source Safe or Subversion, or there are quite a few supported systems, and you obviously need that system and set it up. So Iversy is only like a proxy between the Access user interface and the source code control backend.
Okay. I was hoping it was something that you could sell yourself. My problem is I grew up working in a mainframe, and so source control was how we lived. And so working in Access, the only client I've ever had who actually had a source control project that we used, the source control was just so slow, it was just impossible. So, a lot of people just went around it and didn't even bother checking things in and out. So it really didn't do what it was supposed to do.
Yeah, that is a shame. But with Iversy and most solutions, I know it depends a little bit on the project size. What I've got here is Northwind, so it's not a particularly big database. But if you check out a module, check out is pretty much instant, and I can add some comments in here or whatever code, save that, and go back to the to Access and say, yeah, and this is just a demo project, so I just hammer away at the keyboard. I just do that and it's done. So it is really, really fast. The backend server is on the local network here in the basement. So I am probably in a very good situation there. But even if it would be on a remote network, hosted on Azure or whatever, it wouldn't take much longer for simple operations like check-in and check-out.
Yeah, I think our problem was the server that this was located on was in the UK, and we were in Farmington, Connecticut. This was an international company, and we were U.S. subsidiary. So I'm pretty sure
That can contribute to that. Well, Team Foundation, yeah, they remarked, no, at the moment we don't support Git and GitHub. There are a couple of customers who kind of tweaked it to work, but actually I don't know the exact details how they made this work, and it's not really recommended and not really supported at the moment. We are working on that because Git is pretty much very important nowadays for source code control, though. So that is something I hope we will be able to do in the future. But I would like to remark on something else. Team Foundation server, if you buy it, yes, it is expensive, but please keep two things in mind. First, there is an Express edition of Team Foundation server that is very much the same as SQL Server Express. It's a 5-user version that is totally free, so not expensive at all. And the other thing is you can use the hosted version of Team Foundation server, that is Azure DevOps, and that is also free for 5 users, for up to 5 users. And every user who has a MSDN subscription will be able to use it for free as well. So that is not really expensive either. And you got not only the limited subset of the Express edition, but you got basically the top scale enterprise version of Team Foundation server based on the Azure DevOps platform.
But they don't have a plugin for Access, so we would still need your plugin for Access?
Yes, you would need a plugin for Access to connect to Team Foundation server. And until 2013, you could use Microsoft's own plugin. They had one. But with 2013, they discontinued that. And then you would basically need my plugin, or it all is based, that is not a secret, it's all based on the load from text and save as text built-in methods in Access. So you could basically build your VBA routine that exports all stuff to text files in the file system, and then use basically any client to check in or check out that stuff. So you are not totally dependent on that. And the most important part, like exporting the objects to text, that is not really magic. It's something that is built into Access.
Right. No, I do that now because I've had, over the years, I've had a couple of databases that persisted in corrupting, and I was never able to do it. So in self-defense, you know, I had most of my applications set up to export to text when I close the app if I've made any changes.
Yeah, that is a very sensible thing to do. And you could probably connect that to a JIT workflow where you kind of, after closing the application and everything has been exported, you kind of check in all the changed files into Git, and you have your version history as well. Only with providing the comments and stuff, that would be a little bit additional effort, but you certainly can do that, can work on that basis.
Well, I want to thank you, Philip, for coming again. It's 10 o'clock, so I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to a close. Thank you guys for showing up today, and I hope to have the video of this posted here sometime in the next week to 10 days, and I'll make that available to everybody.
Okay, thanks, Dale, for hosting, and thanks, Philip.
Yeah, you're welcome. And Dale, thank you for inviting me once again. And yeah, thank you everybody for attending the meeting today.